All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight and welcome. My name is Bradley DeBose. I am a CLP 2025 cohort member for AIA this year. Thank you for joining us for our panel discussion on From Disinvestment to Renewal, Reimagining New York City Public Housing. Tonight, we will explore the history, challenges, and future of the New York City Housing Authority, examining how design, policy, and public investment can come together to create a more equitable, sustainable, and resilient housing for New Yorkers. I'm going to read the brief outline of tonight's event. We're going to start it off with a NYCHA story, which is a short skit about the NYCHA process. Following that, we're going to have introductions in which we will introduce our program and our topic. Then we're going to have our panelist presentations. Q&A, you see it number 4. Please hold all of your questions for this number 4. I know it's going to be hard, but please hold those questions. And then we are going to hear from our residents of the NYCHA facilities. I would like to welcome AIANY to the stage.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. All right, so hi, my name is AIANY. I'm a member of the CLP cohort, and I'm introducing our short play that I generically named A NYCHA Story. This play consolidates firsthand experience into a fictional development named New York Houses. The primary goal of our play is to expose everyone to some of the challenges experienced in NYCHA through the most accessible form of resident engagement, which is the tenant associations. Tenant associations liaise between residents, property managers, and other key offices in NYCHA and are important stakeholders in the NYCHA operation. It is important to note that all NYCHA communities face unique opportunities and challenges, with some communities performing well and others not. New York Houses was designed to highlight where the system fractures for some and then underscore key nuances. We will begin with an introduction of our stars for tonight and introduce our roles as members of the CLP cohort. We will then transition into our short play, which will be 3 acts. The first act is the monthly tenant association meeting. The second act is a report back on this meeting with property management. And then the third act is a conversation between 2 residents that are supposed to transition us into the rest of the program for this evening.
Good evening. My name is Gina Boatwright, and I am the Tenant Association President of Tilden Houses in Brownsville. I am a graduate of CUNY John Jay, where I earned my Bachelor of Arts in Criminal Justice, and I am a longtime community organizer and public servant. I am acting as the Tenant Association President of New York Houses.
My name is Angel Rivera, and I'm a resident of Linden Houses in East New York. I'm a recent high school graduate and an intern at the Ready Center, where I'm learning about sustainable architectural development. I am acting as a longtime resident of NYCHA, but a new resident of New York Houses for a year, and I am the primary caretaker of my mother.
My name is Kevin Davis, and I'm playing a longtime resident that has been living in New York Houses for almost 31 years.
My name is Rashida Momo, and I'm playing a property manager of New York Houses, where I oversee a team of 15 people for 2,000 households.
And my name is Bradley DeBose. Sorry.
It's okay. My name is AIANY, and I'm playing a multi-generational resident who works in partnership with NYCHA.
And my name is Bradley DeBose, and I'll be narrating the NYCHA story. Act 1. The date is Tuesday, April the 18th, 2023, and the time is 6:21 p.m. After the residents have filed into the community center cafeteria, received and reviewed the evening's agenda, and shared a warm meal, Mrs. Boatwright is ready to begin the monthly tenant association meeting.
Can I have a motion to call the meeting to order?
Motion approved.
To revisit old business, I met with our property manager. Due to continued delays in modernizing our building's heating system, we won't have access to our community rooms for another 6 months as the contractors continue to store their construction materials.
That's ridiculous. Over the last 5 years, we've lost almost all of our community and program space around this development. There's been all this construction and parsing off of different parts of our development to public agencies and even to some private companies.
I agree with Mr. Davis. When I moved here from Queens Houses a year ago to help my mom, I was hoping it'd be better since I didn't agree with going Rad Pack. I wasn't a fan. Even with this private management office, it felt like nothing was getting done. Just a year in this feels hopeless. We don't have a good quality of life here either. It's like Mr. Davis said, then all the construction and constant need of repairs on top of it. I'm worried.
And I'm really worried too. We have new residents moving in, and we're already struggling plenty to keep our multi-generational and longtime residents engaged. While there are some residents who want to get out of New York houses, I really love it here. This has been my home, as I said, for 31 years, and I really just want to see things get better.
Mr. Davis, Angel, I hear you both. We're doing what we can, but that's hard. Are there any specific repairs you need property management to follow up on?
Well, the gas on my stove is the big one. It's still not working, and it's been almost 3 weeks now. I've been putting in a new ticket each week, and it's just crazy that it hasn't been fixed by now.
Both of the elevators in my building are down again. This is the second time this month. Maybe if I ask them to carry my mom up 13 flights of stairs, we'll get a more permanent solution faster, a lot faster.
You're silly, Angel. I'll follow up with property management about concerns from residents regarding timeline. To move to new business, we need to plan on how we want to use funding for our annual NYCHA Family Day event, and vote on color for volunteer shirts.
After selecting what activities to offer residents for NYCHA Family Day, an impassioned debate over the color brown and pink, the April Tenant Association meeting concluded at 8:10 p.m. Act 2. The date is Wednesday, April the 19th, and the time is 11 a.m. Mrs. Boatwright is visiting Rashida at the Property Management Office for their weekly check-in.
Good morning, Ms. Rashida. How are you?
I think I'm good. How are you, Ms. Boatwright?
I'm hanging in there, and I know you are too. You know you need to be attending our monthly tenant association meeting, right?
My apologies. I'm still overwhelmed with the new role. I knew New York Houses is the 4th largest development in the country, but I didn't expect the volume of work it required. I'm one of the project managers with a team of 15 for thousands of residents. It feels impossible for me to keep up with all of the maintenance requests and issue reports we get on top of the city-mandated projects.
I know. Imagine my end of things with having to educate, organize, and liaison with all these residents. I know you're a busy woman, so I'll get straight to business. Here's the report on the meeting. First, residents aren't happy about the delay in construction. Now, I know this isn't in your hands since the issue is with the contractors, but it's important to remember that these changes in timeline do have real impact on residents' quality of life. We have fewer spaces to facilitate essential programs such as the NYCHA's Resident Watch. If there's any way you can get the contractors to make that process faster, please do it.
I will advocate for an expedited timeline in my next meeting with the contractors. I worry that that'll be additional money that we don't have. What other issues were reported?
Both the elevators in 347 State Street are down again, and Mr. Davis reported that the gas on his stove isn't working.
The gas on Mr. Davis's stove is never working. I saw his tickets today, and I apologize for the delay. We've been backlogged. I will dispatch someone from maintenance to take care of the stove and follow up with the appropriate person about the elevators. I will also email NYCHA Capital and see if New York Houses are scheduled to get new elevators installed.
Thank you, Ms. Rashida, and please include me on the email.
And sincerely, Ms. Boatwright, I'm sorry for not being more consistent with attending. I know it doesn't help when NYCHA and NYCHA partners don't attend these meetings. We'd not only be stronger if we work together, but it'd be easier to envision the future if we worked more effectively together.
I appreciate that. On a different note, one of our new residents, Angel, mentioned something about the RAD and PACT program. I Googled it and saw that it's a program that could offer support with capital improvement. When you have time, I'd appreciate it if you could schedule a meeting between me and the NYCHA staff who are responsible for implementing that program. I want to learn more.
Act 3. The date is Saturday, April the 22nd, and the time is 4:45 p.m. Mrs. Boatwright is on her way to her apartment when a longtime neighbor.
Hey, Miss Boatwright! Can I borrow you for a second?
So as long as it's not another complaint about these damn elevators, I haven't seen you in forever. What's the matter, Pumpkin?
So I was kind of asking my mom about this, but she's cryptic. I was looking at a map of our development for work. The public ones on NYCHA's website, and I wanted to know what happened. The map says there's a laundry room in one of the buildings on Federal Street, but that doesn't exist anymore. That room hasn't been opened ever since I can remember. So, I think my question really is just, where'd all these resources go? What happened to these spaces?
With that question, Mrs. Boatwright's eyes fell. Decades of resident advocacy and organizing were successfully challenged by a long history of federal and state divestment in NYCHA. End scene. Thank you all for watching our NYCHA story. We will now introduce the rest of our program for today. Mr. Michael, please go with you. Okay.
Good evening. We began tonight's program with the Mock Tenant Association meeting to serve as a reminder that lived experience is the foundation of any meaningful conversation about public housing. As architects and planners, advocating for quality, accessible housing is not only a professional responsibility, it's an act of public service. And public service has been at the heart of what our cohort of 8 has explored over the past 6 months. We are the class of 2025 in the AIA New York Civic Leadership Program, otherwise known as the CLP. For those unfamiliar, the CLP cultivates emerging design professionals into civic leaders by refining their critical skills that professionals need to better represent the people they serve. The CLP does this by deepening our connections with communities, developing our advocacy capacities, and supporting pathways into public service, whether that be through elected office, appointed positions, or community engagement. Tonight's event, which is our second public program, has been conceived, organized, and delivered by our half of the 2025 CLP cohort, the 4 of us here at the podium. My name is Kevin Davis, and I'm a registered architect and founder of KWDA, a practice established in 2024 focused on building energy efficiency and retrofit. And my mission is to confront the climate crisis and the inequities it amplifies by addressing the built environment in New York City. AIANY?
My name is AIANY Smith, and I'm a program manager at the Center for Justice Innovation, where I work on the Mayor's Action Plan for Neighborhood Safety, a creative placekeeping initiative that works in NYCHA developments around the city to address quality of life and public safety concerns. As people might be able to tell, I am a former NYCHA resident. That's where some of the skit was based on.
And my name is Bradley DeBose. I am the Senior Marketing and Business Development Lead at Urban Architects. And I just wanted to read the quote, "Let's move from disinvestment to empowerment by making home ownership a reality and community voices our foundation."
My name is Rashida Momo. I'm the interagency ADU coordinator at New York City's Department for Housing Preservation and Development. And I'll also read my quote. I believe quality, affordable housing is a human right, and it is our responsibility as architects to help improve access for communities. Okay. So we see ourselves as advocates for equity. As we research challenges that exist in the housing landscape, several aspects were continuously brought to the forefront. The most obvious being the complicated housing crisis that affects both publicly and privately owned buildings. New York City has a housing vacancy rate of 1.4%, the lowest since 1968. And given the high demand due to low supply, once affordable homes and apartments are now out of reach for most New Yorkers. Public housing maintenance has been a pervasive issue for decades due to the disinvestment in NYCHA, and with climate change at the forefront of our minds, addressing comprehensive sustainability at the scale of NYCHA's portfolio seems to be a tough hill to climb. Lastly, increased private sector involvement furthers the untrue notion that our public authorities should not be our developers or landlords. The City of Yes primarily incentivizes private sector developments by reducing regulatory hurdles. And although programs like PACT aren't perfect, they are allowing for significant levels of funding to be channeled where it is desperately needed, largely, however, because of private sector partnerships. Oops. Sorry. There we go. All that to say, this incredibly complex subject made us really curious about the trajectory of housing and the story it tells us about what we value. We landed on this question: what would a more equitable public housing system look like? We want to explore the chronic disinvestment in public housing and its impact, the ways in which it has informed the current renewal strategies being implemented by various stakeholders, and consider what we would want the state of public housing to look like in the future. Who's operating it, how it's funded, and what we can learn from others around the world who are leading the charge in providing affordable housing for all. Essentially, the topic explores where we've been, where we are now, and where we could be.
So to provide a very brief overview, NYCHA is a public agency that receives most of its funding from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was created in 1934 by Mayor LaGuardia to address the severe housing crisis caused by the Great Depression, with the goal of providing affordable housing for low and moderate income New Yorkers in response to the housing crisis. Successful in its mission for most of its history, the divestment we see today largely took root in 2000, where the progressive idea of the government as the landlord began to lose popularity. This led to significant defunding of public housing programs nationally. Because of this enormous financial deficit, the quality of NYCHA Section 9 housing has declined, and the ability to keep up with the demand for Section 8 has slowed. To respond to this divestment, NYCHA has taken a multi-layered approach to renewal. From our research, our team has broken these approaches into 5 broad categories. The first being comprehensive modification, which provides holistic building rehabilitation through the use of design builds. The PACT program, which is a public-private model that funds capital repairs by transitioning building management from public to private agencies. The Preservation Trust is a public-private model providing affordability for residents and funding for capital repairs. Increased resident engagement aims to provide additional community touchpoints throughout the feasibility, planning, and design stages that work in partnership with tenant associations. And sustainability initiatives are individual programs that aim to make NYCHA more green.
As we think about the future of housing in New York City, it's important to remember that many of these ideas have roots in our past. While social housing may sound like a new term, it already exists in forms like the Mitchell-Lama Co-op and Rentals, see in the top right image here, that were launched in 1955 to provide stable, affordable housing for working New Yorkers. We can also look abroad for inspiration. In the bottom right photo, we have an image from Vienna, where the city owns and manages more than half of its housing stock, offering a model of permanence, affordability, and community. On the left, you can see Assemblymember Emily Gallagher speaking in support of legislation to create the Social Housing Development Authority, otherwise known as the SHDA, signaling that this vision for social housing is not just theoretical, but an emerging movement here in New York. Take it over to you.
As mentioned, we are joined by 3 incredible panelists who each bring a unique perspective to the future of public housing. Joy Cinderbrand is a Senior Vice President for Capital Programs at the NYCHA at New York City Housing Authority, where she leads capital programs delivering historic investment in public housing through innovative design, construction, and technology. Allison Lane is a senior associate and housing studio lead at AECOM, where she oversees a portfolio of affordable and multifamily housing projects that bridge design excellence and social impact. John Paraskevopoulos serves as the legislative director for New York State Assembly member Emily Gallagher, where he helps shape policy on housing, environmental sustainability, and corporate accountability. I would like to welcome Joy to the stage. Please. Just hit the next.
Okay, terrific. First of all, thanks so much for having me here tonight. I'm really excited. This is my first time meeting the participants in this program. It's an incredible program, and I'm really excited to have the responsibility to give you the briefest possible overview of the 90-year history of NYCHA, and also talk about our investment strategies for preserving public housing units, and then really the evolution of our stakeholder engagement process, which has changed dramatically over time. What I don't have much time to do is talk about our residents and the demographics of the developments and also the buildings. So if you want to scan the QR code, or you can also just Google NYCHA fact sheet, and you'll get some of that information from there while I talk about some of the more structure and infrastructure parts of the project. So fortunately, our moderators talked a little bit about the history of NYCHA. If you're really interested, there's on YouTube you can look for American Castles. One of my colleagues, Arvin, did a 90-minute lecture for the New York Law School and goes into a lot of detail, so you can get your full detailed version that way. But the short version is, that NYCHA is this major authority, the largest landlord in North America, and really has 3 businesses. So there's 2 businesses that are kind of our brick and mortar businesses. Section 9 is the classic public housing. It's the developments that NYCHA owns, operates, and maintains. This really houses the majority of residents that are considered, NYCHA residents. This is the standard and typical form of public housing that your moderators told you about that was created in 1934. We also have a huge section of our portfolio that is converted to project-based Section 8. And I'm actually joined here tonight by one of my colleagues, Matt Charney, from the real estate department. So later, when you have your questions, I will stick to my lane, which is capital projects, and he will be able to answer some of your very specific real estate questions. So this is that public-private model that really brings the private investment to public housing. These are properties that NYCHA owns, both the property and the buildings, but the maintenance of those buildings is now being done by the renovation of those buildings and the maintenance of those buildings is being done by the partner, the nonprofit or private partner. And finally, NYCHA manages the Section 8 voucher program. And this is the program where we are essentially managing the voucher process. And we work with over 25,000 landlords, private landlords, that house residents with this voucher. In all 3 of these portfolios, residents pay 30% of their income for rent, and the remainder is either subsidized or the gap is made up by the federal government. This map of New York City, shows just sort of the breadth and diversity of the locations of NYCHA developments. The dark green, that's Parks Department property. The orange are the NYCHA developments across the portfolio. I would argue maybe the orange should be green also. NYCHA is the 2nd largest owner of open space in New York City. We have 2,400 acres of green space, 1,000 acres of street canopy. And it's a huge part of how we help maintain the amenities for the residents, but also just really the temperature in certain neighborhoods where there's a lack of green space for parks. And our portfolio is not monolithic. Certainly people picture the towers in the park, and that is common in the architecture. But in the original sort of model in the 1930s, first houses was literally the first development in public housing on the Lower East Side, you had this kind of standard of low-rise walk-ups. There wasn't a lot of space between the buildings. It's not like the campus style you see now. And very few elevators, mostly, again, walk-up apartments. After World War II, in the 1940s, you did start to see that early towers in the park, that kind of campus style, but still relatively low buildings. It's only in the 50s and 60s that you start to see really those higher buildings, those elevator buildings that are much more prevalent in the portfolio. You picture the towers in the park, but if you think about New York in the 70s and 80s, which is really a period of time where New York hit huge roadblocks in terms of being able to maintain its property. The city and the state had built a lot of housing that didn't have any mechanism for maintenance. And so a lot of that housing was also turned over to NYCHA for maintenance. And so our portfolio includes bungalows in Far Rockaway and tenements on the Lower East Side and brownstones on Central Park West. I mean, it is truly every type of building in New York City is a building that we have in our portfolio. And then, that's really where you have us now. We're trying to maintain this very sprawling portfolio with a lot of different kinds of buildings. It's really a city within a city. I got to NYCHA in August of 2016. I was hired to manage the Sandy Recovery Program at the time. And when I arrived and found out that the physical needs for the portfolio were $45 billion, my jaw dropped. As you can tell, since then, the need has gone up considerably. We've continued to invest in the buildings, but at the same time, there have been considerable cost increases. COVID happened in this time. Other costs of doing work in New York City have gone up as well. And really the condition of the buildings has gotten worse. Buildings that we could repair, issues that we used to be able to use maintenance to solve, they've now hit the end of their useful life. And instead of being able to repair a portion of a riser or being able to repair a roof, you have to replace the whole thing. And so the costs have jumped up considerably. We were able to adjust some of those needs through our capital investment program, which I'll talk about, and then through the PACT program. But by the time we got to 2023, the costs increased considerably to $78 billion. So what do? Well, we're working our way back to investing, again, as much as we can in the buildings, partially through spending dollars directly on the buildings through grants, city, state, and federal grants. But really, the amount of money that NYCHA can pull in from our funders is not nearly enough to catch up with the physical needs of the building. So the other strategies that we've been deploying, which we'll talk more about, are PACT conversions, and somehow my slide doesn't look right on your thing, but somehow the designation, the first one should say investment, capital investment. That's sort of the capital investment that's happened from my department. The second one, PACT conversions, that's stuff that's already happened. And then the third bar had a designator that said trust and future conversions. And so that's missing, but that's how we're getting that other $22 billion, which really just brings us back down, unfortunately, to about a $40 billion need. So there's still considerable need across the portfolio to bring to a state of good repair. This is determined through every 5 years, HUD requires NYCHA and every public housing authority to do what's called a physical needs assessment. And one of the speakers after me will talk more in detail about how that's done. But the idea is to put a dollar figure to what it would cost to actually bring buildings to a state of good repair. So this is not to make them modern and fancy. This is literally to bring them to a state of just basic repair. In 2022, my division was reorganized and formed to focus on really leveraging every dollar. Leveraging every dollar to make sure we were solving problems efficiently, we were doing best project management practices we could, and that we really focused more on our primary customers, which are property management, property staff and operations, and then the residents that we're serving. And this is a particular challenge because all of the work that we do is on fully occupied buildings. So the impacts of construction are inevitably going to be felt by residents. The majority of the work is on fully occupied campuses, all of the Sandy recovery work, all of the component-based work. The division really has these three big buckets. We'll talk more about them, but we do the work, and then we advise the rest of the agency. So as a city within a city, we're the internal department of buildings. If somebody has a concern, wants to know if something it needs to be fixed a certain way, we can be that resource for them. But we are limited by the funding that we have. So what do we fund and why? So we start off with the HUD pillars. And since 2019, those HUD pillars have really been a guide to the majority of our portfolio spending kind of across NYCHA, which is, are we focusing on heating, elevators, pest waste? Are we focusing on the replacement of roofs and the facade repairs? And there has been a lot of progress there. I think as of today, we've replaced 159 boilers and 255 elevators. That's really just a small portion of the need, but it's more than any landlord has ever done. And so we kind of have this tension between investing and also needing so much more. We also are really bound by the source of the money. So our federal dollars are really our most flexible and the funds we can spend the quickest. We are structurally underfunded. The moderator mentioned the 2000 is the year. Actually, internally, we start talking about sort of the 1980s, which is really under Reagan. 1970s was when Nixon stopped the creation of any new public housing. And by the 1980s, Reagan was reducing the funding for public housing. So it's really been a 50-year structural disconnect between the amount of money that NYCHA needs and the amount of money it's getting. The federal dollars we get on capital, we can use pretty flexibly. On the state side, it can take upwards of a year to negotiate a GDA. And once that's negotiated, the dollars have to be spent at the development listed, on the scope required, no matter what happens. City money is our least flexible money of all. There's sort of two pots. Some is mayoral, sort of OMB funding. So very generously, the city and the state have stepped up. But once the city's funded something, that is what you have to spend that money on. So the city's funded more than $1 billion for roofs, but it doesn't matter what other emergency occurs. We have to spend that on the roofs that we've agreed with the city. We tell people if you have a city-funded project, then you should add a year to it, add a year to whatever you think the capital project should take because of all the steps and hurdles to spend city money. The discretionary money allocations we get from elected officials are even more specific. They'll say, not just spend money on roofs, spend money on this bathroom in this community center at this development, right? And so therefore, that is the only thing we can spend that money on. And so we're really restricted. The length of time between when an elected official commits funding and when NYCHA gets that funding in the door is also a very long gap that can be frustrating as people are waiting for the money to come in. So I'm just going to talk quickly about our three types of programs. The component-based program is really leveraging the dollars we have to try to make as much of a difference as we can in that $78 billion need. So we know we're not going to be able to cover all those needs, so how do we maximize the impact of the money that we have? We use qualitative and quantitative data. So we have work orders that tell us where residents are being impacted by conditions in the buildings. We work with property management or other departments like heating and elevators to find out where they're spending most of their time, most of their money to fix things. And then we also can look back on the age of a piece of age of an asset or age of a piece of equipment, and we can use some other data to try to figure out where the worst issues are. So that's how we prioritize those. Most of the other programs, the programs that people read about and that are most exciting, those are usually grants that are specific and non-discretionary. So something like green roofs or the Sandy resilience work or solar panels, that would be a very specific funding source that's paying for that. Ideally, you're not doing component-based work. Component-based work isn't the best way to solve things because you might fix one issue, but there might be other issues around it that you can't solve. Comprehensive work is the best way to approach this. The first program up here, Comprehensive Modernization, that's an in-house program. That's being done in asset and capital management using city grant money. And it's focused on 4 major developments, and that's being done through design build. The second program, which was already referred to, is the public-private partnership, so that this is the model that's brought $8 billion to NYCHA in the last few years to invest in public housing. And this is where NYCHA maintains ownership of the property. It's leased, usually a 99-year lease, to a private and nonprofit partner, and then that partner maintains the property after they've done the renovations. The third is the Public Housing Community Trust, Public Housing Preservation Trust, and this is a public-public model. So it has some of the, like the PACT program, the trust is able to borrow money, which NYCHA can't do, and the trust is able to use more flexible procurement than NYCHA can. But in that case, after the renovations are done, NYCHA will continue to maintain that property. And under all these programs, again, the residents are protected with 30% of their income for rent and all the same protections they have as Section 9 residents. And finally, some weird things are going on these slides. Finally, innovation and sustainability. This is a lot of the really exciting stuff that's happening where NYCHA is able to create, produce cutting edge work that can be used for buildings across the city and across the country. You've probably heard about the window heat pumps. These are heating and cooling units that will allow NYCHA to move away from campus-based heating plants and allow people to have cooling in their homes, right, which right now we don't provide. We are doing a lot of solar power. The 30 megawatts will make that goal. We're going to raise our goal coming soon. And you can read a lot about this on our sustainability agenda website. Just quickly, we have a lot of active work going on. So on the plus side, we have a lot of active work going on. On the downside, again, all of this work is happening in fully occupied buildings on campuses that have to be operated every day. And so we have this challenge of making sure we're getting the work done as quickly and efficiently as possible, while also really being cognizant of the fact that we are impacting people's lives. And that's tension that we deal with every day. You'll notice here that some of the projects that we're doing the most of, like waste management, where we're doing 1,000 interior compactors and hundreds of waste yards, but the dollars associated with that are less than, say, heating and other cooling, because those projects are so expensive and expansive. So engagement has evolved considerably. And we really have always had an engagement strategy and engagement staff, but it was only during the Sandy Recovery Program that NYCHA finally had the resources to put together an engagement team that was focused on capital work, being able to very specifically work with the resident leadership of the developments that were being most impacted by the construction. And that's evolved through the Connected Communities handbook, which I know some folks here were involved in, really creating a guide for how we could renovate public spaces and work with residents and stakeholders to make sure those public spaces reflected their wishes. The sustainability initiatives took it a step further, and I'll just say, right now with CompMod and the property liaisons, we are really focused on engagement at every level. So our clients do include the property management staff, the operations staff that maintain everything we build. Those are the people who have to accept the project at the end. They have to maintain it, they have to be able to operate it, and we want to make sure that it's successful in the long term, not just during construction. So we're meeting with them bi-weekly for every borough, and every project is also meeting bi-weekly. And then on the most senior level, we meet on a monthly basis. On the property level, we've introduced these capital projects property liaisons, so that every single tenant association has a point of contact that they can reach out to, cell phone number. They have that contact has a portfolio in a neighborhood where they can work, especially if there's 5 or 6 or more projects happening simultaneously. We don't expect a volunteer to get to know each project manager and understand how all those projects fit together and how all those timelines work. The property liaison's job is to translate that. And then on the project level engagement, I'm just going to talk quickly about, I'll have to move quickly, standardized touch points, and the idea that we heard very clearly that there wasn't enough engagement. And so even after the first introduction of this process, we've increased the number of engagement touch points and standardized them so they're built into our schedules on our project management software. So the project manager can't skip that step. They're required to upload the appropriate documentation that they've fulfilled that step. And we have touch points with management operations, and then with resident leadership. You see 2 sign-offs here. And then we're introducing now, we've been piloting them, but we're going to be introducing more broadly resident surveys after design and after construction. The goal is to be able to incorporate that into our procurement process so that we can avoid using contractors that are not providing the right service. And this varies by scope, obviously. There are certain scopes of work that there really isn't much by way of input. If we're replacing a roof, NYCHA has a standard specification for how we replace a roof. That said, if the roof replacement is going to be disruptive or going to impact residents on the top floor, that requires intense coordination. And so when we say that it's a baseline project, we don't mean that we're not coordinating on a day-to-day basis with the people who live in the building. We're talking about the number of touch points during design, procurement, construction, and closeout. Most of our scopes fall into that category of having a minimum of 15 touch points. And then each project has a bi-weekly coordination meeting that the tenant association and property management is invited to attend. Some people do, and some people don't. And we are certainly there to just give the information that people need. And then finally, we have a lot of resources on our website, which I know isn't the prettiest website, but it really is full of information. That there's maps, there's data books, fact sheets. You can find there's a listing of every outage at any building across the city, elevator, heating, hot water, so you can keep track of how long those outages have occurred and what the current status is. And certainly the NYCHA Journal is a little bit of an insight for us on how we can really serve the population by telling you a little bit more about how we work as an agency and how we interact with residents and stakeholders. And then lastly, I just see that there's a slide here that was supposed to be here, but just wanted to throw that this is a reference slide in case a question came up later in terms of the thinking behind PACT. And so the idea was that you can really have the very same unit with the very same family in it, and NYCHA will get half as much money as a PACT partner to maintain that unit. And that's really the logic behind why the PACT model is so much more effective at maintaining properties. And I think I made my 15 minutes. So I'm going to hand it off to Allison. And thank you so much for your attention.
All right, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Allison Lane, Senior Associate and Housing Studio Lead at AIANY, another really large organization similar to NYCHA. And I have the profound honor of working on a lot of projects with NYCHA. It's an experience that I really enjoy and is meaningful, and just the opportunity to serve as an architect or as a citizen architect, as the CLPers like to say, is a really important part of my career and trajectory in terms of giving back to the community and working with you all to figure out how we continue to address not only public housing, but increased housing for the future. So before I move on really quickly, I just kind of want to get a survey of who I'm talking to here. So how many people are architects, planners, designers? Okay, all right. I mean, we're at the Center for Architecture, so I figured. Anyone else working just generally in the housing space in another stakeholder group? Of course, the next one is anybody that works at NYCHA specifically. Joy, Matt. All right, wonderful. So from my experience working with NYCHA at AIANY, I'll go through a few case studies leaning into data, design, and reimagining for social good, going through some of the work that we do directly with NYCHA and some of our visioning studies as we look towards the future. So in addition to seeing who I'm talking to in the audience, I also like to start off presentations with a very brief overview of AIANY. I mean, really brief. always ask the pop quiz question, do you know what AICOM stands for? Does anybody know? Okay, it's fine. I'm gonna keep rolling. So AICOM is an acronym, of course, and it literally stands for Architecture, Engineering, Construction, Operations, and Management. So I also like to say that we literally do it all. We can do it all, but of course, it's always better when we're working together with our partners and stakeholders. Very briefly, again, some of the innovative multifamily and mixed-use design projects on the boards past and present with our studios. These are more market rate, but again, we lean into ideas of carbon neutrality, sustainability, LEED, WELL, et cetera. In addition, we take a look at some interdisciplinary transit-oriented development studies, as well as office to resi advisory and design projects. And yes, most importantly and most relevant to the discussion and why we're all here tonight, here's a brief snapshot of just a little bit of the work that AICOM does in partnership with NYCHA through various programs and projects, including the 2017 Physical Needs Assessment and Energy Audit, and then the most recent 2023 Physical Needs Assessment, alongside with the Capital Projects public website, which I'll show you, as well as Comp Mod, which Joy has given an overview of, as well as some of the early public preservation trust projects through our program management services. Additionally, we work on projects under Joy's Asset and Capital Management Division that address specific scope areas at particular developments. Some of that includes Sedgwick Houses in Bronx, working with NYCHA's in-house architects and engineers for a community center redesign, that had been, left, pretty much abandoned. It kind of turned into like a storage area for various materials and supplies for some years, but the team is redesigning that. And before they had a chance to begin the design, they partnered with us to come in and actually do their first 3D scan and survey of that community center property. And that project should be finished fairly soon. And also, just lastly, some site settlement remediation with regard to structural site issues at entrances and polo grounds. So some of this more immediate work that needs to be done alongside the more comprehensive projects. So I'll give a brief overview. I probably won't get into all the inner workings of how the physical needs assessment came to be, but with my many hats, I'm also a very proud program manager for the 2023 physical needs assessment. It was a joint venture that AICOM is in with STV. For the program management of the assessment, as well as the data analysis and capital planning that led up to that $78.3 billion number that NYCHA needs to rehabilitate their portfolio over the next 20 years. So this slide just shows on the end the PDF cover to the actual physical needs assessment report, and that's publicly accessible through NYCHA's website on the P&A page, and you can also, just simply Google that as well, and then you'll also have access to the prior reports as well. And again, the physical needs assessment really just kind of sets that foundation, as I like to say, for everything that needs to be done. It helps Joy and her team at NYCHA really assess how to allocate funds. So here you'll see both the 20-year need and 5-year need for the P&A. It's showing the 2023 need, which again is $78.3 billion, alongside the 2017 need for the 20-year need. Again, that number was the $45.3 billion, which Joy mentioned earlier. And, from 2017 to 2023, that represents, a 73% increase in terms of, how much, NYCHA needs to bring their portfolio to a state of good repair. in the 20 years. And of course, if you look at, simply the 5-year need, that number is still very high, indicating that, obviously there's a lot of, more immediate upfront work that needs to be done. Here you can take a look at the pie chart breakdown of the $78.3 billion capital needs by discipline and key areas. And all of this information in these graphs, they're taken directly from the publicly available report. Additionally, this chart here illustrates some environmental and special capital needs that are also a part of that $78.3 billion P&A number. And just to learn, there's $5 billion for decarbonization with regard to space heat, an additional $2.4 billion for decarbonization just with regard to domestic hot water. So one part of the 2023 P&A, one deliverable that, I'm very proud of, and I know NYCHA is very proud of and loves as well, is the NYCHA Capital Projects Tracker. It is a public website. I didn't do the QR code, but you can go to capitaltracker.nycha.info. Google it. There's also a landing page through the NYCHA website as well. And if you don't want to, flip through the cumbersome, PDF that we saw earlier, you can go straight to the website. It's an interactive map. You can click on search developments, and then you can pull up and see, what that 5-year need is, that 20-year need is, a little bit of that breakdown. Additionally, you'll be able to see the total project investment and particular developments to date, since 2017. And, this culminates not only the transparency of the data, but then it also, is updated continuously, at quarterly intervals as projects move forward and as funding is allocated to developments. And it's really great. Not only is this for you all, the public, of course, but obviously the residents are able to access this data not only through a computer online, but there's mobile capabilities as well. So again, it's really about not only engagement, but transparency of data, what's going on, and access to information. So just piggybacking on a little bit of what Joy went over earlier, there's a lot of needs that NYCHA has, hence the physical needs assessment, which is mandated, as you mentioned, every 5 years by the federal government. And NYCHA has been doing so much work over the past, many years to, try to, rectify, the historic disinvestment. And, I'm constantly talking with, stakeholders at NYCHA, even residents at meetings, just trying to understand, what's going on, what are their experiences, through projects, through challenges, and what opportunities there are for the future. So again, another hat, slightly before I got started on the 2023 P&A, which really started in 2022, I had the chance to work in-house with NYCHA in the Comprehensive Modernization Program back in about 2021. And it was a great experience to work as a consultant through AECOM with a few of my AECOM colleagues, and again, directly with NYCHA, including Michelle Moore, who is the Director of Comprehensive Modernization, to work with them as program managers to help them develop the procurement and RFP process for this design-build program for design-build teams, architects, contractors to bid on these 4 initial pilot sites for development-wide holistic renovations. So these are some images that I'll click through fairly quickly, just giving you an overview specific to the Comprehensive Modernization Program, and all of this is publicly available data on the CompMod website. Again, in the spirit of transparency, they have all the PDFs and materials that they share directly with the residents at their engagement meetings throughout key milestones. So the CompMod, there's 4 pilot sites. There's St. Nicholas in Harlem, Gowanus and Wyckoff Gardens in Brooklyn, as well as Toad Hill and Staten Island. And as you see here, it represents 8,000 residents, almost 4,000 apartments, 38 buildings, and 3 boroughs. So there's 2 CompMod sites and 2 Gowanus rezoning fund sites. And again, that equals that $1 billion in investments, noted here and in Joy's presentation. And then here are just some snapshots of the 4 CompMod developments, just for a bit of visual reference for the scale. And here is, a key image, throughout the NYCHA documentation, which shows the baseline scope of work, stemming from the P&A and the key HUD pillars. So these are things that NYCHA likes to look at and sets kind of like the baseline scope that design build teams that are proposing on these programs should be incorporating into their design solutions. Early at the start of the CompMod program, we worked on the basis of design documents specific to the Comprehensive Modernization Program. And this was a way to set some baseline design standards for the procurement efforts for the design build teams that we're proposing. And it's not overly stringent. It has some suggested takeaways that are aligned to NYCHA's goals with regards to modernization and sustainability and resiliency. We also reference a lot of NYCHA's design standards as it relates to typical unit upgrades, standards in terms of ADA accessibility, as well as references to NYCHA's open spaces and connected communities playbook. And then just leaning into the community outreach and engagement specific to CompMod. Again, as Joy mentioned throughout, all of NYCHA in terms of the resident engagement at key milestones, CompMod really incorporates that as well with monthly meetings, resident update meetings at key milestones, all the way from, pre-development, pre-design throughout the entire life cycle of these procurement efforts through construction. And then here are just a few photos of some early resident outreach back in 2022 with CompMod that I was a part of at St. Nicholas and Toot Hill. And then more recently, this past summer, I believe that was in July, I took the ARC Scholars, the NYCHA ARC Scholars, who are young residents that are part of this program that exposes them to design and construction through using NYCHA as kind of like their case study. I brought them to a few of the interns that we had at ACOM. I brought them to St. Nicholas houses, and at that time, St. Nicholas was just starting the mobilization of the move out efforts. So there were like 2 vacant buildings right now. So there is some temporary relocation in CompMod. And that has been something that, we've worked on in-house directly with, NYCHA's CompMod directors to manage. And then this is just, a quick kind of like existing what's there at St. Nicholas and Harlem. And I actually, live within walking distance from here. So it's, a really great opportunity for me to kind of poke in and out and see the progress of everything. But eventually, we'll get from, the more typical tower in the park red brick, which is very traditional to NYCHA, to, something more modern. This is the publicly available rendering from the selected design build team. So this is what the residents have to look forward to in the future. Not only are they getting newer facades, but they're more energy efficient. They have more insulation. And then, of course, newer interiors and the apartments, which really address the structural issues inside the building. So just wrapping up here, I wanted to quickly transition into some of the additional thought leadership and thinking that we've been doing within our ACOM housing studio. Some of the ideas we kick around to our counterparts at NYCHA and the various departments, just as we're continuing to think about, what more can we do to deliver more housing and deliver it faster. As you know, we're at a critical time period right now in terms of housing. I mean, we've been here for, quite some time, this inflection point where we really need to, increase the housing stock. So I know that NYCHA, throughout all of their departments, and especially the real estate department, are thinking about and already carrying out various strategies to address this issue of, the challenges at hand with NYCHA, but also, add to housing. So our concept, which we called Abundant NYC, it's a theoretical concept, just leaning into all of our, work and experience with NYCHA and our understanding of what some of the needs are of NYCHA residents and the city at large. So with our concepts here, we're thinking about deeper retrofits where we can, update the building's enclosure for, exterior energy efficiency, but also lend itself to additional durable and attractive interiors inside that holistically modernize these developments for residents. And then in addition to adding on to some of these existing buildings, really looking at the actual groundscape as well, where we can, provide additional areas and spaces for social activities, services, and retail. So this is just a case study of one of the NYCHA developments, Amsterdam houses on the west side. And sometimes we like to, take a look at the map and, see what NYCHA developments have, a little bit of open space that we can add to, and like how can that transform, not just for the development, but also for the surrounding community to really create a more integrated public housing approach where NYCHA is no longer really separated, from the city in some aspects. So in order to, address the idea of retrofitting more rapidly, some of the ideas that we thought about were, really creating what you see in the central bottom portion, like a step one of like an immediate new build. So that way you can, take out portions of, existing building. You don't have to move them off site, but you can, move them to a new build on site, renovate, half of what's there existing, and then move the residents back in, and, you kind of like rotate, counterclockwise until you attack all of the existing buildings with the retrofits, allowing you to renovate and do upgrades that are needed on the interiors more rapidly. And then another idea that we had was this idea of kind of activating transit-oriented development and as well as the community around NYCHA. So with that same site, we noticed that there's, Lincoln Center on the one end on the east side, and then on the west side, again, this is where we kind of go into, more of our like expansive research and knowledge. We say, what if there's a future train station? I mean, there could very well be like a train station there in the future based on, other city initiatives. How can NYCHA and other agencies such as the MTA and Port Authority work together to, merge goals and ideas. So that way this development gets access to, more nodes that allow for easier transit, and you're able to integrate the development and the people more so into the community as a whole. So whereas in the existing kind of framework, if you're walking along the site, you most likely probably walk along the perimeter of NYCHA, but in this idea, we're saying, okay, what if there's like this kind of like throughway of like green space and activated corridor with various services and activities that kind of bring you, from Lincoln Center, a major cultural hub, throughout, a renovated, retrofitted development, through a potential new transportation node, and beyond to the West Side Park. So that's just something that we were thinking about. And then this is a nighttime render that we did, again, kind of illustrating, the existing kind of separation with the current development between the Lincoln Center and the West Side. But once you think about ways that you can begin to redevelop these sites and bring them back into the city, then you have that thoroughfare. And then again, just simply looking at all these opportunities around us with NYCHA, and then thinking about, how that opportunity can be realized. Thank you. Now we'll have John. Thank you.
Howdy, everyone. Hi. Let's see if I can figure this out. All right. So my name is John Parskevopoulos, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about a piece of pending legislation in the New York State Legislature to create a social housing development authority, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means in the history of social housing in New York. I work as the legislative director for New York State Assembly member Emily Gallagher, who represents Greenpoint and Williamsburg and Brooklyn in the State Assembly, which is the lower house of the state legislature. There's 150 state assembly members, 63 senators. We co-sponsor this bill, or we sponsor this bill in the Assembly with Senator Cordell Clear in the Senate, who represents Harlem. I'm going to skip over this. The housing crisis is really bad. We know it's really bad. And I'm going to start by talking very briefly about the history of social housing in New York and what social housing is and what that means. So in the context of this bill, we're talking about a couple of different things that are a bit more specific and technical. We're talking about limited equity cooperatives, limited profit housing, which is both of these are types of corporations that are defined in New York state law. So for example, for limited profit housing, that was a type of housing company created in the 50s where the amount of profit they can take on a development is capped at 6%. Everything above 6% has to be reinvested in the development or new construction. And we're also talking about public housing, which we've heard all about. All of these things are forms of social housing. Social housing is a sort of umbrella term that encompasses various forms of decommodified housing, or housing that is insulated from private market forces. And if you want to, you can look it up. You'll find different papers and think pieces about what social housing means, examples of it in different countries around the world. There's usually different indicia of social housing, like resident control, decommodification, and that sort of thing. All of those things are very important to us. I prefer to think of it as housing that represents the things we value as a society instead of the things that the market values in a commodity. So we value permanent affordability, community, sustainability, and things like that. And the financial market is going to value return on investment. Lately, it's typically thought of as like an exclusively European or foreign thing, and it is actually, social housing is something that is deeply embedded in the history of New York City. The first social housing in the form of limited profit rentals started to be built in the 1890s in New York City. In the 1910s, there were cooperatives that were built by workers that were self-funded across the city. This picked up in the 1920s and 1930s. Unions began pooling money to build social housing, largely in the form of cooperatives, and built together, I think, about 40,000 units across the city. You'll see one example here, Electchester, which is still around in Queens. It's owned by IBEW. They eventually created a sort of quasi real estate investment trust called the Urban Housing Foundation that collected funds from 19 different unions across the city to build housing during the mid-century. We also had the Mitchell-Lama program, famously from 1955 through the 70s, that subsidized the construction of social housing, mainly in the form of limited equity cooperatives and limited profit rentals across the city, and built, I think, about 140,000 units. And then the Urban Development Corporation is another example that existed from 1968 till 1975, and it's something I'm going to come back to, but which sort of serves as the prototype for what our bill proposes to create. It was a statewide authority that built about 33,000 units of mixed income affordable housing across the state, including 3 wholly planned communities and Roosevelt Island. And as you can see, there's some different pictures, but the UDC's construction projects were very well tailored to the context and the sites in which they were built. They were famous for prioritizing design and livability. A lot of them are still around. Some of them are still under affordable regulatory agreements. So what our bill proposes is creating a new authority, partially modeled on the Urban Development Corporation, a state authority dedicated to acquiring, rehabilitating permanently affordable housing, building new permanently affordable housing, and maintaining that permanent affordability. This is a map I actually made a couple of years ago, and it needs to be updated, but this is just to say there are proposals to create social housing programs in cities and states across the country. What this map doesn't show is there have been programs recently created in Chicago and Atlanta. I think the Cambridge Housing Authority is also doing interesting social housing stuff. And this is sort of the laboratory of democracy at work, right? Communities across the country are coming to the conclusion that social housing should be part of addressing the housing affordability crisis and are approaching it in different ways. There is no right answer. The bill that we wrote was written with the input of stakeholders across the state over the course of about 1 year, also looking at various models around the country, visiting Vienna and learning about their housing system. And it most closely resembles what they've created in Seattle, but there's a lot of different ways to do this. Like I said, it's an umbrella term. Lots of things fit within social housing. Why are we proposing creating an authority? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, the authority, and when I say authority, I mean like a public benefit corporation like the MTA, Port Authority, or NYCHA. We can create a governance structure that suits its purpose, and we can create it out of whole cloth. If this were created, if the social housing program were created within an existing agency, we would sort of be slotting it into the existing governing structure. Also, it would be formally part of the executive branch, which is fine for a lot of things, but maybe there's a governor who comes in who says, I don't want to do social housing anymore, and the program gets completely defunded. We don't want that. We want something that can raise its own debt and manage its own budget and be insulated from political processes as much as possible, because we view housing as a public good, and we want it to be maintained and built regardless of who is in power. And then also, authorities benefit from a lot of the same things that something within an agency would benefit from. They would be publicly owned, publicly controlled, subject to various forms of democratic accountability and also tax exemption. The board structure that we've proposed in our bill is novel but not unprecedented. The bill proposes creating a corporate board for the SHDA. They would have 4 residents on it, elected from the authority's own projects, as well as 5 positions that would be essentially political appointments from the governor, the HCR Commissioner, Housing Community and Renewal, as well as the ODTA Commissioner. And then among the other 3 gubernatorial appointees, 1 representative from organized labor, 1 housing advocate, and 1 technical expert. And these would be confirmed by the Senate, and this board would also select the president. And I'll talk a little bit about the reasons for this board structure later. A simplification of basically the model is here in this chart. Basically, the authority would have its own ability to issue bonds, to raise debt, or to borrow on the capital market. And it would combine whatever money it can raise from those sources or from federal subsidies with a $5 billion capital funds appropriation from the state in order to build housing that could be maintained as permanently affordable, and the debt would be paid off by rents from those projects. Permanent affordability would be maintained through deed restrictions and ground leases. It would retain title to the underlying ground in all cases. The buildings would be leased by a ground lease, 99 years, to be operated as limited profit rentals or limited equity co-ops, either to a nonprofit or a subsidiary. And it would have a portfolio-wide affordability requirement. So across the portfolio, it would have to be mixed income, but there's no specifications as to exactly what the income mix in a particular unit has to be. And let's see what I've got next. It would be broadly empowered to acquire land or property, however possible. So if the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act is passed, and that's a bill also pending in the state legislature that it would allow tenants to have a right of first refusal on the sale of their housing, it would be able to facilitate those purchases to act as a sort of qualified sponsor of the purchase or a fiscal sponsor. It could acquire land from land banks. There aren't any land banks in New York City. I think there's over a dozen upstate. It could go shopping on the free market. It would also have a right of first refusal on distressed housing, and distressed meaning in foreclosure, bankruptcy, subject to a tax lien, or condemned or something like that. It would also be able to accept public transfers. So if the city is sitting on a parking lot and they want to get rid of it and have housing built on it, the city, any city, could just give that land to the SHDA to build on. That would all go into the portfolio, and then it would fix things up, rehab them as needed, fix the rents, and so on. Now, the labor and contracting standards are very important to how this all works. The projects are classified as public works and subject to prevailing wage requirements. If there's prevailing wage, or rather I should say, prevailing wage requirements can be opted out of with a project labor agreement that would apply to every tier of contractor. And the authority is also classified as a public employer. There are MWBE standards included and community hiring standards applicable in New York City. There's also preference for materials sourced from in-state or the United States, and flexible contracting options including design, build, and best value that are actually modeled off of the procurement language in the NYCHA Preservation Trust. Here's a couple of just theoretical examples of the types of interventions that an SHDA could undertake. Now, it could build scattered site housing. It could build, a tower, a co-op, whatever. But also, occasionally, there are instances where it would be very useful to have a large, well-capitalized state developer. One example that I thought was interesting was when the Signature Bank portfolio went belly up in 2023. Now, that portfolio included 3,000 buildings in New York City, and I believe the winning bid went to related companies. And I think it would have been interesting as a thought experiment for a public housing authority or an SHDA to have bid on taking over that project and then turning all of those units into permanently affordable housing units. Also, the state often plans these big, makes economic development plans, which are great. The Micron chip fab outside of Syracuse is one of those. It's going to create a need for 12,000 new housing units in the Syracuse area. But these plans often don't come along with housing plans. And it would be very useful to say, okay, well, we're going to create these 12,000 or, create need for 12,000 new homes. But in order not to create pressure on people who already live in Syracuse, let's create a plan with an SHDA to acquire the land and build those homes. And another example from Syracuse is demolition of the I-81 viaduct, which opened up 24 acres of developable land, there's a lot of concern from longtime residents that developing that land would actually would render that community unaffordable because of the new development. So we have a lot of models that we've made over the last 2 years with the help of volunteers. This is a hypothetical portfolio, right? Some units upstate, some units in the, here in the city, and based on this portfolio, we think it pencils out pretty well and actually much cheaper than some of our existing affordable housing subsidy programs. So just by contrast, 421A, which was the main program that the state used since the 70s to subsidize affordable housing construction costs, I think like $1.4 million per affordable unit created. We think that the SHDA could build on average at a cost of about $650,000 per unit. Also, these figures are about a year old, so maybe the tariffs have changed things. This is also popular with voters if you explain what social housing is. So this poll is from New York City, likely voters in New York City from 2023. Also, the Center for Popular Democracy did in 2024 prior to the presidential election polling about social housing in 12 battleground states and found that it was very popular. But again, if it's explained to voters. And so I want to return before I end to the UDC and basically a quick rundown of what makes what we're proposing different and how we've learned lessons from past programs in New York State that build social housing. So the Social Housing Authority should not depend on any singular personality. That's why we have the board structure that we created. That's why we think it's very important for residents to be involved and for it to be insulated from political processes. The UDC was a remarkable entity, but in part it depended on Ed Logue leading it. And some of the past experiences with public authorities in New York have resulted in, or as a result of one person sort of exercising like authoritarian control over it. And we think that the authority should not depend on like our luck in getting one person in power or in charge who really believes in the mission. And that's what the board structure is intended to guarantee. We also think that solutions to the housing crisis will not be revenue neutral. So the UDC was supposed to be revenue neutral. It went bankrupt in 1975. Now, part of the reason for that was because Nixon cut off funding for it in 1973, or cut off funding for a program it depended on. We've structured this so that it can utilize federal subsidies, but it should not depend on it. That being said, this is going to take money from the state. And we think that that's worth it because there is a dire need for housing that the private market cannot meet at the lower levels of the income ladder. Also, the SHDA is not a landlord. Unlike NYCHA, this is a public developer. After it builds something, it's intended to turn the property over to someone else who will operate it. And the SHDA is also intended to complement the existing housing ecosystem, and that's part of the design. So there is a large network and ecosystem of, affordable housing nonprofits and developers, and part of the intention here is to say that, if there is a nonprofit that manages supportive housing, for example, the SHDA can build the supportive housing and then turn it over to that manager to provide those services and make sure that that community need is met. It also acts as a housing safety net, and that's part of the reason it has a right of first refusal on distressed housing. There's a lot of old housing across the state and in the city that is in desperate need of rehabilitation, that the private market does not want to spend money rehabilitating. And also occasionally when there's a housing crisis, as it happens every 20 years or so here, we end up with these like zombie homes that are in foreclosure and no one knows what to do with them. And this allows those sort of units to get caught and rehabilitated and not fall through the crack. And then another question we often get is like, what's the difference between this and HCR or existing subsidy programs? Part of the difference here is, first of all, this is meant to be mixed income. It's meant to be for everybody. And also cross-subsidy potential across the portfolio. So the SHDA could build units downstate that could potentially subsidize units upstate or wherever the case may be, or it could build a development that's 100% market rate and then use that to subsidize a development that is 100% for people making 30% of AMI or less. And I wanted, before I close, because I think I'm out of time, I wanted to mention a couple of last things. One, if you're interested in getting involved with the campaign to try to pass this bill, it's called How's the Future? I don't have a QR code or anything, but please look it up. And I also want to just close by saying that part of the reason we introduced this bill, it wasn't just because, and the design of the bill is meant to reflect the fact that, when, for example, when we went to Vienna and we learned about like how the city had created this very impressive social housing ecosystem, they're guaranteed that more than half of the population lived in social housing. We saw that they were using all of the tools that we have, right? Limited equity co-ops, zoning tools, limited profit rental housing, subsidies for interest rates, and those are all tools that when we looked at our own history here in New York, we'd been using since the 1920s and stopped in the 1970s, and we think it's time to reinvigorate and rebuild that legacy of social housing in New York. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys, I am back. I know you missed me. So Allison did a really, really quick survey, and I would like to do a fairly quick survey. I would like for you to stand if you have ever lived in, if you have not lived in an affordable or Section 8 housing. Have not. Nope. I said what I said. So guys, whenever I'm saying this because we're getting to a really, really no. Okay. Yes. Now you can sit down. Okay. We're approaching the Q&A section of this program, and I would like for these questions that we're asking be educational and really, really thoughtful. We're all working towards one goal. Okay, so with that being said, I would like to welcome our panelists and cohort to the front for Q&A. So let's do the three panelists here. Yes, I'm for and Tom. Matt. I'm thinking my partners. Oh, you have a question? So first, thank you guys for the wonderful conversations and the presentations. I would like to start off with asking our panelists, if you could change one systematic barrier tomorrow, legislative, financial, or institutional, to unlock large-scale reinvestment in NYCHA, what would it be?
Financial? We'd like to have more financing. I'm not sure if you're asking. We would need the structural disconnect in funding to be fixed. That would happen tomorrow. That'd be great.
Okay, so looking 10 to 20 years ahead. Yeah, go ahead, John.
To add to that, abolish the U.S. Senate.
Say more.
So looking 10 to 20 years ahead, what would success look like if New York City truly reimagined public housing as a sustainable, equitable, and dignified public asset?
That's a question for NYCHA residents. I don't want to answer on their behalf, but certainly our mission is to provide safe, healthy, and affordable housing. And right now, we are struggling to do that under the current structure.
Thank you. Allison, as a housing studio lead at managing both private and public projects, how do you maintain design excellence when working within the financial and operational constraints of public housing?
Sure. I think the way to maintain design excellence is to not think of it as an afterthought. I feel like as an architect, and I'm sure others in the audience can agree that design excellence is embedded in what we do. And I know there's the dichotomy of public projects versus private projects and clients, but as an architect, as a citizen architect, and someone that really values the work that I do in public and affordable housing, I always want to bring innovative design thinking to projects regardless of budget. And I know that a lot of the consultants that work with NYCHA and those in-house in NYCHA feel the same way. You have to think about design excellence as a given. It's about maintaining dignity and opportunity and equity for residents that you're designing for.
Thank you.
I have one question for John, actually, because everyone keeps asking us, what's the difference between the Social Housing Development Authority and NYCHA?
That's a good question. Thank you. So I think one of the differences is that the SHDA is, like I said earlier, not intended to be a landlord. NYCHA has that function in addition to its various other powers. The other difference is it's statewide. It's meant to build everywhere across the state. And a third difference is it's intended purposefully not to be dependent on the federal government for sources of financing at all.
And to follow up on that, Joy, I think you had a slide that showed that there's still quite a bit of HUD funding that's coming, right, for NYCHA. Right, you're still getting federal dollars, correct?
We are still getting our federal funding. During the federal government shutdown, there's always a risk of funding being cut off for any federally funded agency, but we've been getting our federal funding so far. And right now, we have no way of knowing for sure what our budget will be next year, but we are going to keep doing business as usual and providing the best service we can under the current structure we have.
All right, so now we're going to open the floor to the audience. For Q&A, I am going to stand up and I'm going to bring the mic up. We're going to start with, I'm going to go with her first because she has
I'm very eager.
Say her name.
Hi, my name is Gisela. I want to thank everyone for having, I think, a lot of breadth in a relatively short event, both in terms of supply, but also how do we maintain stuff. I also really appreciated that there was a human element on top of the very intense financial numbers we were seeing. And to the extent that any of you, frankly, are comfortable, I'd love to hear how you sort of hold those two truths simultaneously. Someone's shower head not working is actually very, very disruptive. But when we're talking about $70 billion worth of maintenance, one shower head doesn't seem like anything, right? And I imagine that all of you, to some extent, are having to balance that. So again, maybe as a role model for the rest of us, I'd love to hear how you hold those two.
So, NYCHA is a large organization. I talked a lot tonight about the capital side of the house, but the operations side of the house is far larger. And they're juggling even more balls and even more crises because they are day in and day out serving the residents at the developments where they work with these day-to-day issues that are really in people's homes. And so I have to just sort of give props and thanks for representing a property manager. Really, they are trying to do so much with so little. I think for our purposes on the capital side, we're trying to work with the data we have and with both the quantitative and the qualitative data we have to make the greatest impact to benefit the greatest number of residents with the limited dollars. So when we might be looking at something like, okay, where should we replace a roof or where should we replace a waste line, we'll look at the work orders and see, okay, where have most leaks occurred? We want to help the most number of residents with this limited number of funding. And so it's really, that's where we try to have the rubber hit the road. No.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to say something. I live in NYCHA, and I'm a tenant, and I was born and raised in Red Hook. And I'm really big on credit. I don't understand why they don't have programs for the tenants who have jobs, who may have bad credit. If we can get tenants that are working families, and get their credit repaired and get them to 650, 700, those families can prepare to move out into condos and houses, and then new families can come in. And the repairs that need to be made, those apartments can get gutted out, cleaned, renovated for new families. A lot of times, how can these apartments get fixed if families have been living there for 30 and 40 years? They cannot be fixed the way they're supposed to be fixed. So sometimes we gotta think a little different and do things a little different to get different results. These people have jobs and wanna move forward, but they may not know how. So with all this money that's flying around, we need to teach these tenants how to get good credit. Credit speaks for itself.
So this is more of the programmatic side of NYCHA. So I will say there is the NYCHA REASE program, that's resident economic empowerment and sustainability. So they work a lot in response to what you're raising as a concern. I will say as well, for any other tenants in the audience, when it comes to questions that might be related to specific developments, we do have index cards so we can follow up with the appropriate people. I'm happy to pass those around so that way that I can forward it to our city partners through the MAP initiative so they get sent to the appropriate property manager and NYCHA teams.
Thank you, Ayanna. So I'm coming down the back.
After spending 3.5 years of my life repairing NYCHA buildings, doing local law 11 work, doing the masonry, brick exteriors, the roofing, and the parapet replacements, every time I talk to tenants, and then I should mention I did work for a nonprofit developer that built infill housing in Brownsville. And so we did a lot of tenant outreach, and what I always heard when asked what should we build was nothing. Like, stop building housing. Give us a Starbucks, give us a bank, give us something better. And then when we asked tenants, and this is why I really appreciated that last comment about credit moving out, where they wanted to live, it wasn't a better building, it was somewhere else. So the goal was often to leave. Don't get me wrong, there was pride in lots of tenants that we heard from that in their community, but if that's the case, I appreciate that kind of radical suggestion. It's like, well, what about just replacing this in a gradual way? I know I'm not talking about leveling it, but it must have occurred to you guys, and I would just like to take the conversation to that more radical approach. If you do infill, move tenants into new low-rise, high-density, get rid of the high-rise, low-density, or transform that to a different use completely, over time, maybe we could start to embrace a totally different model.
I'm Matt Charney. I'm Vice President for Design and Construction within our real estate group. Joy asked me to join on stage just to talk about our real estate side of the house. I didn't just walk up here. I was invited. So I mean, I work primarily on the RAD programs, which are PACT and Trust. We are looking at redevelopment. Fulton Elliott Chelsea is our first and highest profile for sure, but we're not only looking there. So under the federal RAD program, you don't have to just renovate. You can replace and build something new, and we're looking to do that at Fulton Elliott Chelsea, wherein we basically build a couple buildings first, move people into new, more modern buildings, demolish existing buildings, and complete that cycle. So no one leaves that campus directly, but everyone ends up in a new home. So that's kind of like a build first redevelopment model. We have an open RFP right now for, it's called Development Opportunities, just general. There's a lot of housing authorities across the country that have acquired buildings. So rather than building them yourselves, you can just acquire, move residents into the new buildings that you've bought, essentially, and then do what you will with the existing buildings. We've heard, I understand, we have a very diverse population with over half a million residents. So I think there are other opinions. One that we've heard and we've been responsive of is that we don't want to displace people, and that we do want to keep people on site. Even so, even our renovation programs early on in PACT, we did them all in place because people were afraid to even leave for a month to get their apartment renovated. So we're over that bridge now, I think, because we have a lot of success, and we're not. Everyone's going to get to come back in their renovated home, but there has been a fear, and we've been very intent about and intentional about keeping people on site. So I don't know exactly, when you say like people want to go somewhere else, I don't know if it's like different type of housing next door, or you're talking about like across the city or out of New York, but I guess that infill. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do at Fulton, and I hope it's successful there, and I hope it's successful elsewhere in the city. It is, new construction is more expensive than renovation, and I do think there's a lot of good in NYCHA buildings to be, talking about the physical buildings, there's a lot of good there to be preserved. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We want to have a lot of tools available.
Thank you.
Hi. There's a bill in the state Senate and Assembly right now that would repeal the stock transfer tax rebate, and 5% of the proceeds from that are earmarked for NYCHA. ChatGPT tells me that would be about close to $1 billion a year. I really like the idea of comprehensive modernization, especially because it keeps people in Section 11. It seems to me that if that revenue came through, if the bill was passed, maybe you could do a lot more of that. What are your hopes for that happening? What are you doing to see that it can happen? Do you think that now that we have a socialist mayor, he might use his platform to get that bill passed and stop bailing out Wall Street and start helping low-income people with that money?
So I can't, what I will say is I think that raising new revenue is going to be a very important fight in the legislature this coming session. And among the various mechanisms for doing so, people are going to be talking about and considering financial transaction tax or reinstating the stock transfer tax or something like that. There's estimates for a combination of these proposals raising like $50 billion in new revenue every year. I don't know if I don't know how things are going to shake out. I think a lot of us are going to be doing everything that we can to secure additional revenue to expand and preserve the vital public goods and services that make the city the greatest city in the world, including public housing in NYCHA. I still think the federal government should also cough up a bunch of money. But yeah, I think that's going to be part of the conversation. I can't speak to what's going to happen, though.
For, I guess, the gentleman who spoke just mentioned in real estate, because I was curious on the Fulton housing that you just mentioned. I know there's actually this might be a touchy topic, but I know there's a protest this weekend by the residents. in the building, which I'm assuming that they're not happy with the decision that was made. And I'm sure that probably happens in all the housing projects once you start going into this process of modernization. But in this case, I believe you implied you're tearing down and going fresh versus taking another approach which might work potentially more creatively with the existing stock. And I know as an architect, I find working with the buildings and then working with the historic building, what are now historic buildings in a way, and then bringing in low-rise components that start to add density in creative ways that kind of respect the fabric, respect the variety, hold the kind of character, and honestly, the strength of the whole buildings that have been built there, because they have, even though they're in disrepair, they have strength and integrity that a lot of new construction is hard to get, frankly. So just as a creative thinker, I'm just curious to know whether, I'm sure you've gone through many evaluations of options, but I'm curious what your current thoughts are, given the response.
So Fulton Elliott Chelsea started as a rehab project. Well, there's been ideas, it's been talked about for a while. We selected the development team based on a rehab project, and then the residents, we put it to a survey, and the residents, the majority results or whatever, were to do the redevelopment. So certainly there are some protests and people not happy with that decision, but we did put it to a survey. And Miguel Acevedo, the tenant leader of Fulton, has been very vocally supportive of the plan. So I think with everything faces some opposition. We hope to address everyone's concerns and do the best project that we can and deliver for our residents. We're also doing, it's a very high profile project. We're doing a ton of preservation. We're doing historic preservation. We've won, New York State Preservation Awards for Harlem River House is beautiful. Williamsburg, we've used, I think our first preservation project was Williamsburg. In the last 5-6 years, we've raised over $1 billion of historic tax credit equity for NYCHA. So by far, we're a preservation program first and foremost, but we are really excited about opportunities for redevelopment because we do think where it's a right fit, it offers a great solution for our residents.
I think we have enough time for 2 more questions. I'm going to get.
So let me really introduce myself. My name is Renee Kitt. I am the Tenant Association President of the Elliott Chelsea Houses. I was specifically voted in this year because on an anti-demolition platform. You actually just stated incorrectly that the majority of residents on a survey said they wanted demolition. The words, new construction and rezoning. And 3,388 out of 550 is 16.23%. Never been a majority. I understand how you do the math. We can manufacture consent. The residents are not for it. We have nearly 1,000 signatures said between Fulton and Elliott Chelsea that we are against demolition. So yes, there will be a protest. Yes, NYCHA will continue to do its spin. Yes, everyone will say we are for a demolition process. Yes, we have specifically asked what are the problems with the development of Fulton, Elliott, Chelsea, and Chelsea Addition, and to this day, we have not received an answer. So it is not true. So sorry to shock you all, but we do not want a demolition process. It can be renovated. People ask for the money. It's called $2 billion you're about to give to related companies to build a platform. So let's be real, and let's keep it real. We are against it.
So,
in the future, you should make sure you invite the residents.
Sorry, invite the residents to.
So this thing, I mean, someone here, yes. But when it was asked,
Yeah.
who was there, the one thing that Allison left out was, are any residents here?
NYCHA was invited guests. We were just invited to speak.
They were invited guests by the CLP cohort. So the cohort would take fault for not inviting the NYCHA residents personally, because just like everyone else, we're learning this, So I thank you and I hear you, but I am going to move forward, and I do hear you. I have to because this is what this is for. But thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm going to focus my question on the general budget of NYCHA. I'm just curious, when it comes to the billions of dollars that needs to be preserved, what do you think is the inefficiency that is facing NYCHA the most? That you think that if there is general political restructuring and reform that residents should know about, what should it be? Is it similar to healthcare, where the administrative cost is the burden and there's the micromanagement of the insurance companies? Or is it a different problem? Because that's where I'm going to based on this conversation.
There is no one answer to that question. I'll say from my perspective, and because I was the person who talked about the billions, it's really alternative procurement strategies would make a huge difference. Design build has made a big difference already on some of our largest and most complex projects in terms of trying to leverage every dollar, trying to save time on each project and reduce the procurement costs both in time and in money. NYCHA does have design build as a legislative approval, but we don't have progressive design build, we don't have CM build, we don't have a lot of tools that other states and cities use to make it cheaper and faster to do construction. So that if I could change one thing, that's what I would ask for. And the city has also been advocating for that from the state legislature for some time as well.
I have one question. During the process, you're speaking about capital projects, right? So my question is, when NYCHA converts these developments, is there any budget in capital projects before they just do beautification to repair the pipes and the leaks in these apartments? Because most of the developments are getting beautification, but there's no capital project money. Because you see all on the news, these apartments that are still privatized, that's been turned over, NYCHA no longer repairs. But before they convert them, do NYCHA have capital project money to repair the pipes and the leaks in these walls that are causing damages in individual apartments? Because I know, if I'm wrong, correct me, that when it's converted, that the new property managers have a time frame like NYCHA has a 5-year period to do certain repairs or whatever their administrative procedure is. Is that the same way with the private sector when they convert over?
So the PACT RAD program, with both PACT and Trust, sorry, there's a lot of acronyms. The RAD program requires that you address the 20-year needs of the development. HUD requires that. And so we do a lot of that up front with capital repairs. Not everything is addressed. Some things like, for example, like if a roof has been replaced within the last 5 years, then we might put away money in the capital reserve to address that in 10 years down the road. But by and large, it's a comprehensive renovation. You asked specifically about plumbing. We don't, in some developments, some buildings, we do full line replacement, all the stacks, because it's necessary. Others will do investigations and scopes before the repairs, and that might only be 25% of the pipes need replaced, or only the sewer lines need replaced, versus all of the plumbing. So I think the scope of work varies by project, but it is comprehensive, and it has to address all the needs of the development. So it's in no way just a beautification project. I've seen a lot of these. I've been working on them for 6 years myself at NYCHA, 10 years. Like, we're doing really true improvements that need to be made. We're also tracking work orders over time. Even after NYCHA is no longer managing it, we're tracking the work orders month to month. So if we're seeing an issue, NYCHA will see that. So there's still NYCHA oversight there to make sure that the repairs are, things are going to keep. It's a building, so it's things will break over time. But if there's any fundamental issues after the repairs are made, we'll see that and we'll know that it wasn't scoped properly, and we'll make the partners go back and fix it.
So my question becomes to you, before NYCHA converts it over to you, do you have a full survey of the apartments that need piping repair course, converted to find out after you get it, a year, 6 months later now, the leak is still there, hasn't been addressed. And the reason why I'm addressing that is because a lot of times NYCHA close out tickets where the repairs have not been done. And I understand that there's a lack of skilled trade as well, you know, to maintain the upkeep of certain things. So that was a major concern because when you look at all the news, not everywhere, you see tenants complaining or residents complaining, or they've been converted, but then when they show they got the leak, the mold, the pipes, and they're saying nothing's been done prior to the developers getting in. But yet NYCHA's tickets have been closed out. So that's why I asked about regarding the capital project budget, because we talk about the regular buildings, but we're not talking about the interior of the individual's apartment. We're talking about beautification. So that's why I asked that question. But I understand you have a 20-year plan to...
So we, the P&A is a starting point. We have to go into 25% of the units, and then we ask the developer to get into 100%. We never get into 100% of people, but like we try to get into every unit before the conversion. Things like plumbing are a little tougher because it's behind the walls, obviously, but we do require them to do scoping, send cameras down, like we do invasive investigations on, try to get into each line of apartments up and down the building. So we're not going to see every apartment's plumbing, but we're trying to make our best assessment of what's needed and then put a budget together that scope and budget together that matches that. And again, sometimes it's like it all needs replaced. Sometimes it's 25%, 50%, but the developers, again, the PACT partners, they need to operate these buildings, right? So this is the time for them to get the funding to do this work so they don't have to deal with it in 5 years. So they don't want the building to leak either. And I think that's a benefit of a PACT partnership, rather it be with a private developer or with nonprofit developers who we work with a lot, or with the trust. Like, you got one chance to fix it. You better get it right, because if not, it's your problem for the next 100 years. So let's fix it. So I think hopefully everybody is incentivized to get the job done right after conversion, and we're also watching to make sure they do, because we're not just going to trust them. So
thank you. So thank you, Ms. Borai. So we're going to continue our program, and the cohort, we did not forget about the resident voices. So we would like to, I'm going to pass it over to Rashida.
So as we conceived of this event, we thought it would be impactful to end in the same way that we started, highlighting the resident experiences to ground this topic and remind ourselves of why it matters. Angel Rivera and Gina Boatwright were invited not only to participate in our skit, but to also offer some departing words along with our cohort member, AIANY Smith. Given their experience living and working with NYCHA, we wanted them to share what they hope for public housing moving forward and ways that professionals in the built environment can better support some of the challenges they face.
First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you to the panel and the presentation. That's first and foremost. Secondly, as a resident of NYCHA, I would like to see more transparency regarding the PACT, the trust, and the various components. We need to see more transparency. Tenants need to be more informed, and the reason why I say that is because you have some tenants that's homebound, can't come out, they're not getting the information, but yet they're required to vote when these things, various situations come up, but they don't have the information. So we request a little bit more transparency and give more notification as what NYCHA is actually doing, so that they're aware within themselves versus those that don't come to meetings, that don't participate for whatever reasons. But thank you so much.
While listening to Jay, Allison, and John speak, I would love to say thank you for the hard work that's been put in and completed so far, honestly. But there are some things I would like to consider. One thing would be to obtain youth engagement in our communities and show transparency through the youth. Because some of these kids, honestly, they believe that people don't care about the community. And that's scaring them, that's scaring their parents, and making them shy away from resources that are prevalent in the community. So I believe through youth engagement, we could wholeheartedly bring our community together. We could wholeheartedly bring our communities together and potentially raise revenue, or just overall bring a better light in the community of bringing opportunities and positivity.
Perfect. And then Ayana? Yes.
So first, just thank you all for your time this evening. I know that this conversation is never easy. And as a reminder, I was born and raised in NYCHA. So currently working in NYCHA, I kind of understand some of the challenges having to work with the same touch points that the tenant associations do. I think what resonated with me was really just a need to reconcile the social needs of residents with also, the capital needs for these buildings. So definitely to echo what Angel said, is just more cross-collaboration and public education about these things and inviting people into these spaces so that residents can really make informed decisions, and us as, supporting partners in the nonprofit sector can support them into improving their community.
And with that, I would like to conclude this evening's event. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all. Thank you to our panelists, and good night.